Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Friday, September 2nd Land Use Committee meeting. We are going to be starting this morning with our second review of the ADU draft that we've been working on for changes. And I don't know if
I can start, and then Rick can assist me as we walk through some of the changes and some of the responses, what we've done. So if you'd like me to jump in.
go right ahead. Thank you.
So there was a comment that we might want to consolidate the garden cottage item into the full table as a detached dwelling unit. And I think that we have and really just eliminate the garden cottage section. I know that Rick can talk about some of the other adjustments that needed to be done throughout the code, but just looking at the table, you can see that we now no longer have that section. We have it basically a new section that talks about, and I'll call that 1.211 up to 750, I'm sorry, 1.22, 1. Up to 600 square feet GFA and entirely within an accessory building, an existing accessory building. This is really the old garden cottage. And the intent of this is to capture those, it really does formalize I think what many feel the original intent of the garden cottage was, which was if there's an existing structure and you're not expanding it. Now, the deck language and the entry language is still in the code, saying that you can up to 600 square feet would include the deck and the entryway, but it basically is to recognize an existing structure that's already there, and
microphone, remember.
Whoops, and to allow that particular structure to be converted similar to, I think, what the original intent was. This particular one is one of the items that we are sort of introducing to the community as permitted by right, as these structures are already existing. And then similar to what was presented last week, attached dwelling units that are up to 750 square feet and entirely within an existing single-family dwelling. So this is a conversion of a portion of a single-family dwelling. These are the two that we are permitting by right or through administrative approval. Purpose of the administrative approval would just to be confirmed compliance with the development standards of those. These, I believe, are the only two that would be moving out of CUP into a P. And so that is, I think, two big changes, and the table consolidation with the garden cottages is also a significant change. Are there questions about that, or do you want to just keep moving along?
I think we can, unless we have a question.
Well, I think one thing with the moving the garden cottages into detached, I get the physical change being minimal because it's inside an existing building, but it is a change in use, adding a new family by definition in the statute. And we can talk about this more as we get through it, but I'm having thought about this more and talked to more people, I'm feeling more like we probably want to have more of a public process outside a single family dwelling for additional units like this. So that's just a quick thought, a note I made on this last night, because you're adding new people. Should there be a bedroom limit on the principal dwelling as well? Should that be, in terms of as a matter of right? And you said two different types, matter of right or administrative approval. I assume we're going administrative approval.
It actually, I think I misspoke. It does have a P, permitted by right, but it really is, it's subject to the planning director review. Mm-hmm. So.
Right. So there would be basically a staff review. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking that should be extremely limited, and I think that's the intent, mm-hmm. and that's what we've talked about. Mm-hmm. So should there be a bedroom limit on that one? But then on the other one, the more I thought about, there's little functional difference between an existing building that's being converted to a dwelling use versus a new construction small building that's being added as a dwelling use. You're adding people, you're adding cars probably, you're changing the function of the property in a way that is different than changing a literal garden cottage to a garage, say. It wouldn't be a new family. It'd be the same people using it for a different purpose. So I'm leaning personally, and I'm very interested to see what people have to say toward that not being permitted, but having having it be subject to the public notice and probably a conditional use permit.
Yeah, I mean, we'd have to have it subject to a conditional use permit. That's really our only other option.
Right.
And I think the intent was, and we certainly can be responsive and do a circle back, especially, we could even do an abutter circle back on, with some specific questions. I think the intent, the idea was that, lower the barrier in where you think you can, that it's not a significant change, but also beef up or at least add a lot of clarity to the standards. And I think that as we get to the standards, there is, we talked about the subordination standards and the compatibility standards. Those have been, a lot of detail has been added to those sections to I think, level set expectations about these types of units, and not just how they look, but the size, the maximum size, the size of the accessory building. These are all some of the changes that have been brought forward. So we can run through some of those.
I understand that. And I think, since you mentioned it, Beverly, I hesitate to point to the federal government for anything, but there is a federal plain language statute that was put in about 10 years ago, and it sets forth guidelines for all federal documents that say you should be able to find what you need and then understand what you have found so you can use it more easily. And I think the usability in terms of a checklist or something else simple, as we get this to a more final stage, something that the landowner could just take and preferably one page, to know how simple this could be. And for example, the conditional use permit, I would not foresee that as being a onerous process. I wouldn't want it to be. Certainly not the $30,000 process we heard from the engineers. Preferably on a small application, it could be something that a landowner could take care of by themselves. And the checklist would help explain that.
I know that I'm in 100% agreement with you about that. I do think that we had a discussion about moving away from plannerese or terms that are not understandable from the layperson, and make it accessible so that if you read it, you say, oh, I understand what that means. It's even if you had to look up what a specific term is, but that you understand generally what you're reading, what the requirements are. I think that is a very good goal. It's something that planners are moving towards as well, moving away from planner speak and moving into terms that are more accessible and understandable by the community. So I think that is a real a good directive to staff, and we can certainly take that up. And I think Nick and I actually were going to take that up a little bit more on the standards and make sure that those are, I think, more accessible. So, and we can talk about those standards as well.
Thank you, and I apologize for kind of a big jump in there, but
No, that was kind of the plan all along, was to be able to take this and then turn it into that.
and we do have people on Zoom too, so I don't know if they want to wait or.
All three of our committee members know that they can raise their
Okay,
hand,
all
and
right,
then we can
all
let them
right.
speak. I don't see any hands raised, so.
So I think that it might be a good idea to move, and maybe Rick can review onto page 6. It depends on which copy you have, but it really is if we could move to the attached
10.814.
.43, and we could just talk about the subordination standards a little bit. And I think there's been maybe some minor changes in that, because I see some blue there. But Rick, if you could maybe talk.
Where are we?
I think we're going to move to 10.814.43, which is the subordination standards for an attached ADU. And then we could talk a little bit about, after that, the exterior design of an attached ADU. And we can, and I think Nick can run through the compatibility standards. So if we could just talk a little bit about the subordination standards, review those again. And
Actually,
then,
I'd like to have Nick look at the subordination, because I think he's the drafter of the last, I think. Or maybe no.
and there is the building height. That's a change, if you don't mind, Nick. If you can, it should be in blue on your copy, because that identifies, I think, some new edits.
Yeah, the colors are confusing.
I think it's on page 7. Thanks.
So I guess the first standard under 43 is the same one that we, I think, discussed last month, which is the door arrangement between the principal dwelling unit and the accessory dwelling unit. So there's no substantive change, I think, to the door standard, I guess you'd say, subordination standard. I thought we were going to delete 34, 32, which was the 40% facade part. Didn't we
It
say
is,
we?
it is deleted.
Is it?
It's shown, it's shown deleted. Do you have a current?
Do you have draft 5?
All right.
The colors changed, so,
I have draft 5.
yeah. The
Yes,
colors
so
changed,
do I.
so the original color, that would have been red struck through, now it's blue struck through.
Yeah, I got that one. Where's
I
it?
know,
It's
I-
not struck.
Yeah.
Yep.
The one that was the
So
one.
this shows actually in blue, and you
Sorry.
that it
No,
is
no,
deleted.
that will help. Maybe others might need
I was like, I
You
have
need
that same one, so.
The blue is a good way to see what's
Yeah.
been changed since the last version, so I think it's
Got it.
That's fine. Are we all on the same page?
It's interesting because the PDF colors are different than the word color.
I know, that's just your settings, but in a way, these different colors are all helpful to figure out where the changes came in, the new changes.
Okay. So this is now page 7.
Yes.
So we deleted 432, which was the subordination standard that minimized the width of the ADU if it was placed along the street frontage of the front facade. It used to be no more than 40%. It didn't seem like that was a necessary standard given what we've done below in respect to the step back of the addition, if there is one, which is 433. We still are talking about the 18 inches either being recessed from the front facade or projected, and it's a minimum, not a maximum. And the whole idea with the either reseating or projecting ADU is if you imagine having a single-story ranch and adding a 2-car garage with an ADU above it, it's all attached. The idea is not to create a very long linear facade with no jog or break. Most long walls that face the street are going to be 32 to 38 to 40 feet long, so adding another 24 feet would really be out of character for almost every neighborhood. So the idea there is, again, just to create a break in the plane, either forward or backward, and 18 inches is the minimum. Ideally, if you were to erect a garage beside a house, it would be best to have it either 20 feet back, so the cars sit behind the facade that are parked in front of the garage, or you bring the garage forward and put the garage doors on the side if you have a wide enough lot to accommodate the turning movements for the cars. So 18 inches is the minimum, not the max. And so if you, again, think of a ranch house, the idea would be the garage would be pushed back if the garage doors face the street. So the cars, it doesn't say the cars have to be behind the facade, it says just 18 inches, but the ideal would be to push it back far enough the cars outside the garage are not in the front yard of the house. In the same manner in projecting, it would be ideal if there aren't street-facing garage doors, and the whole garage came forward 20 feet from the house with the doors on the side, so you wouldn't see them. So that's the idea with the 18 inches, which I haven't got the original text, I think, here. I can't discern whether, I think 18 inches may have already been in there, but I don't remember.
is. Oh, yeah, I don't know if it is.
In the existing code. So then we deleted 452. I think we discussed that at the last meeting, and looking at 434, which is the building height, what we're suggesting would be a good subordination standard is that the accessory dwelling unit in an attached form be no higher than 75% of the existing building. But in the case of a ranch or a single-story building that's very low with generally a very low-pitched roof, that it would be, it could be the same height of the ranch structure, which is pretty typical for additions on ranches. If they're not upward extension adding a second floor, they're typically at the same height, but at least there'll be that projecting or recessing of the addition if it's on street-facing facade. So again, right now, the code, I believe, says it just has to be lesser than the height of the principal dwelling unit. This says no more than 75%. So that's the substantive change to that section. Have I missed anything over there so far? Any questions on that one?
So Nick, I guess the big change on 433 from the last time we looked at it is you're providing for a garage in front of the front wall of the house.
Yes.
As long as why was that proposed? Or what
I looked at a lot of ranch garages, not just in Portsmouth, but across New England and probably beyond. And it's not inappropriate to have a two-car garage in front of the structure if the garage doors don't face the street. You have to have a wider lot to be able to maneuver the cars.
But it's going to need to say that about the garage doors facing the street later
I think
on.
it does in the...
Later on.
Yeah, right. That's really the next section. The architectural design guidelines. So you can count all the dots here, but I think we've got about 11 or 12 design guidelines. They're not standards. Do we want to go to that?
I had one quick
Yeah.
question before we, this is not a change, but it ties into my earlier comment about conditional use permit or not, and that's home occupations. It's currently limited to one, even if you have 2 units, and we haven't really talked about that, and I just thought we should talk about it. What's the thinking? No accessory dwelling unit should be allowed to have a home occupation, especially where they're somewhat limited these days, or
Where is that section? Is this later on?
home occupations are not covered.
81433.
81433, okay, back.
Was that intentional, or was that just?
So this is so that there's no businesses in single-family neighborhoods, right? You're not running a business, so you don't have a sign and see clients, but you can certainly work from home and have a home office, right?
Clearly, as I do.
Yeah.
But what about the accessory dwelling unit? Should they be restricted from doing that or not?
I don't think so.
I didn't think so either, but yeah, I think,
So the way it's written is, if the owner lives in the accessory dwelling unit, they can have the home occupation there, but you're asking whether both
You
units
can
could
have-
have.
it seems restrictive the way it's currently worded.
Yeah.
Where is that?
81433, page 6. That's a good question. Do we need to? What's the purpose of this?
I would think both of them, we should allow both of them to
So
be able to
delete
have
that?
home occupation,
Yeah.
just not a business.
Delete that paragraph.
Usually the home occupation standards, I haven't looked at ours, but it's typical in code that they limit signage, they also require parking. I mean, the things that would that would be noticed by neighbors are usually managed pretty tightly. The question is, if you had it in both, would the regulations be sufficient to cover uses in both units to make sure that there's no impacts?
I think this ties into, I think we'll talk about this, but my personal preference would be to allow it in both, but perhaps have some of the performance criteria applied to 2 as one, because it's a single-family neighborhood. So no more additional deliveries than you would have if you only had 1, that sort of a thing, which is what you're saying, Beverly, the same restriction. But like I said, we haven't talked about it, and I noticed it, and I got thinking about it, so.
I think we need to take a look at the home occupation standards and see how protective they are of, the delivery thing, in my experience, has been one of the biggest issues, is that we
Right.
constantly have trucks coming and there's a little bit more traffic. And imagine that doubled if it was in both units. So at this point, I do feel like the language in here is protective of that, but if we could take a little time after this to take a look at the home occupation, we can potentially. My inclination is to say that it should stay as it is, because I think that the doubling of the deliveries, the traffic, sometimes, I don't know if our standards allow for client visits. Sometimes, like a hair salon or something, it would allow for client visits, minimum signage, and not more than 1 client at a time. I just don't know how strict our home occupation standards are. I don't know if Nick or Rick has a sense about that.
We have 2 levels of home occupations. I'm just trying to find it right now. But
In the definitions.
is it the definitions? Okay.
Well, rather than try to figure that out right now, I think we've identified it as an issue, and it needs some work, that's all.
If we were going to expand it, I would want to make sure that I understand that the impacts would be managed under the current regulations.
I think we need to look at how it's defined how it might work and talk about it, so.
All right. I'm going to hop back to the consistency standards. So this is an updated draft of those standards. I think there are 11 bullets on that sheet on page 8 under 444. And they range from evaluating the massing. This is all about making sure the ADU addition is consistent with these 11 criteria. And I'll go through them in detail if you want me to, but it's really dealing with the massing of the building, which is the shape or form, both of the roof, the footprint, obviously in relation to the architectural style of the building that's already there, whether it's colonial, Greek Revival, Federal, contemporary, modern. It should be in nearly all instances very clear what the architectural style of the existing structure is, so it's not rocket science to see if it's consistent with that pattern that's already been established with the principal structure. So it's really, again, looking sort of from the top down at the roof, the siding material, the windows, the doors, making sure they're consistent again with the existing structure, the trim details, the projections, if there are any on the building, whether there's bays, dormers, and again, if it's applicable and the addition has a dormer, it should be consistent with the dormer style on the existing house. The garage door piece is in here. The limitation being it's preferable to have no wider than 9-foot doors, so you can avoid the 14 to 16-foot single doors that occasionally find their way onto a 2-car garage, so the whole front of the building goes up with the door. Again, this is a placeholder, but it's something to discuss if people are uncomfortable with that kind of precision on the type of garage door, meaning the dimensions. It doesn't have to be there, but it seems to make sense to me, looking at the overall character of Portsmouth. It's not oversized single garage doors on 2-car garages. Same with the exposed foundation. I mean, if you're in a ranch house with a concrete foundation that's exposed, you'd be able to do that on the addition. If you're in an older structure and you're doing an addition, it should be consistent with the existing structure. And the same with other design features, should there be any on the ADU portion of the building in respect to gutters, downspouts, shutters, whatever is on the main structure should carry itself into the ADU that's attached. And these repeat themselves, these 11, they're not standards, they're guidelines. So they're interpretable. And either under the conditional use permit or the administrative approval, either someone or the planning board has to go through those guidelines and determine that what's being proposed in this case for an attached ADU is consistent with the principal structure.
I had a question. What do you do if, this is all focused on the principal dwelling on the lot, but what if that dwelling isn't in character with its neighborhood? You're going to make more of it. So should there be language about fitting in with the character of the neighborhood, or some balance there, or some?
It's a really good question, but I think the right answer is always going to be, if the house that's there, the structure that's there, is to most people's eyes inconsistent and clashing with the character of the surrounding neighborhood, it's generally not going to make sense to put an addition on it that looks like the rest of the neighborhood. I mean, this is typically obvious to people in my mind when there's a very modern or contemporary structure placed in a traditional neighborhood. This happens all over the country, right? And it's jarring. Everything is different about it from all its neighbors. I don't know that we'd want to put an addition on it that.
But what about detached? Because these also apply to
Well,
detached.
we haven't got there yet.
But it's the same. It's the
It
same
is.
standard. That's why I mentioned it.
Okay, I think there's a much better argument to be made for detached, but I'm still not certain.
I'm not there yet either. I thought about it when I was going through these. And
So it's a good question.
So, Nick, aside from that question, these two lists are the same, right? The ones for
Yes, yeah.
would it make sense to put them at the beginning so to simply, if we
Yes.
decide that they apply to both, would it make sense not to put them in the individual sections, but to put them at the very beginning?
Probably, yes.
Yeah, so we
Just
can.
those they're
If we don't differentiate,
Yeah.
as we might,
Yeah, okay.
yeah,
More concise is better.
yeah, less
Good
words.
point,
Getting closer to one page.
yes.
Right. But for now, let's make sure we want to keep them the same.
Yeah, if they change, but then you can just have the changes listed, not
Right,
all of them.
Right,
Right.
right. Yeah.
So the garage doors,
Finish that.
would you add language to have them not facing the street?
We could encourage that. I think there's no harm in encouraging.
So maybe just saying that.
Yep.
And on the width thing, rather than say 9 feet, would you just say no double bay garage doors, just have single bay garage doors, or is it, you feel?
It's hard. I'm open to suggestions, but it has to be very clear. It isn't an argument that we'll have down the road as to whether it's still a single door and it's giant.
I'm with you,
Yeah.
I'm just,
Yep.
I just
No,
wanna-
I'm
Thinking
open.
out
I
loud.
just want to take, in this sense, I just want to take care about the idea that if we can't regulate that on a, if somebody could do that, we don't have that standard for a single-family dwelling. Insofar as it's subordinated, insofar as it's compatible, those, keeping those changes aligned with those two directions, rather than creating a new standard just because we think because we don't have that standard for single-family dwellings. So if we can add that change with, that new standard, because it either meets the subordination requirement or the compatibility requirement, instead of creating a standard for these new additions that somehow is more onerous than what we'd require for a single-family dwelling. Because
I don't know that
yeah.
it's more onerous. And,
Do we require
you know,
single-family dwellings to have side entry garages
No,
or
but we
garages
don't
that don't?
require single-family
Yeah.
dwelling units to have any of this. So it would all go away if we wanted to
But
treat them
these,
like single
that is
families.
true, but the point of these is to ensure compatibility and subordination. That brings me back to my original point.
You're
is
not going
that
to add a garage to a garage. That's my point on the attached.
Understood, okay.
There won't be a garage there if they're going to add one.
Okay.
So,
and this would only apply to a new garage that would have a dwelling unit as
Yeah.
a part of it. So
Correct.
Correct.
it is different.
yep.
Okay.
And I don't think it's onerous, importantly to the conversation, to somebody, it shouldn't cost a whole lot more money to have two garage doors instead of one large one. There will be a cost increase, but it's pretty insignificant, and the benefits are pretty significant to the neighborhood.
Right.
Okay.
We ready to move on?
Yep.
Okay, so we're in detached now,
We're
right?
in detached now. I don't know who wants to head that one up.
So I think, and I think the color changes do kind of help us to understand where some of the changes occurred. And so, Nick, if you want to talk about the subordination standards for DADU with focus on the changed colors, I think, which are indicative of where there has been additions since the last meeting.
Okay, so we start in 51?
I think we are starting at 10.81453, and that's the subordination standards, but I just,
Nine.
Okay.
I do want to just draw attention to, and I will kind of create a new matrix, because now we've had significant public input, so aside from the public involvement report, we have some new input, so I'll try and create a new readable summary that goes through each of these and saying where the genesis of the change came from. I do want to note that 10814.535 really does cap the size of the accessory building, and that is a direct response to public comment received through this process, but I'll let you start at the top, Nick.
All right, so looking at 531, honestly, I'm not sure what's changed there. I thought
So
we
the
had a
green,
10-foot
the
fence.
green text is just text that's been moved.
Yes,
So the red text is stuff that we had last time. The only change, I think, is changing in to within.
got it. So that one's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
It's a 10-foot step back for a detached ADU to be at least 10 feet or more behind the front building wall of the existing principal structure.
And this is where we got rid of the facade
Yeah,
again.
so then we dropped the facade, sort of modulation requirement of the 40% under 32, because we felt like we picked it up below with the height, volume, and footprint subordination standards. So the next one is the height. the height of a detached ADU shall be no greater than 25 feet or 75% of the building height of the principal dwelling unit, whichever is greater. So if you have a 32-foot federal on the lot, you can probably get a 26.5-foot height on your detached ADU, but most people are going to be utilizing the 25-foot maximum height, which is essentially, at its largest, a 2.5-story structure would get you 25 feet. 2 10-foot floors and an attic. 2-story structure with a roof, whether the attic is occupied or not. So that's why the 25 is there, to support somebody building a detached ADU with potentially a 2-car garage on the bottom, a set of stairs going up to the second floor, like a carriage house, and having the ADU on the second floor and potentially bleeding into the attic, because the roof has to be there anyway. That's where that 25-foot maximum comes from, or 75% if you've got a taller building, you can go a little bit taller, but you're not going to see anybody taller than a federal building, which is 32 feet, so you're really talking 25 to 26 feet is the maximum height. It doesn't mean someone has to build that, that's just the maximum. Does that make semi-sense for the height?
So I actually, we've had a lot of discussion about these, whichever is greater, whichever is less. So just playing this out, if you've got a single-story principal structure,
Yep.
then you can have a 2.5-story detached accessory dwelling unit to go with it?
You could.
It has a garage.
Is that what we want to do? I guess that's the question. Do we want to have the detached accessory dwelling unit taller than the principal structure? I guess that's the question.
Well, it has to be a minimum of 25 feet, or maximum of 25 feet.
Right. So if you've got a,
But
If
that'll
you're-
get you 2.5.
so if you have a 1.5, that's the question I have. If you have a 1.5-story, we've gone back and forth of whichever is greater, whichever is less. If you have, this allows a 1.5-story principal dwelling to have a 2.5-story accessory dwelling unit. And I guess if that's what we want, I just want to make sure that we understand.
Well, I think, yeah.
And
So
it previously did read whichever's less, so we kind
Well-
of changed that,
Well,
yeah.
we actually
But-
used to say it had to be lower than the principal
But less
dwelling.
doesn't work.
I know less doesn't
Yeah,
work in this
so,
case,
yeah.
but what I'm saying is we used to say that the DADU had to be shorter.
Well,
than the
yeah,
principal
which is
dwelling unit. So now
obviously
we're saying we
useless
can
because
have-
it's a millimeter would meet that standard, right?
No, just hear me out.
Yeah.
So now we're actually reversing that and saying the DADU can be taller. So it seems to me that there should be something in it. It
Yeah.
would make more sense to me to say, have something in here saying it can't be taller than the principal structure. But maybe that's not what we want. No, it's kind of, I've seen these, not necessarily in Portsmouth, but out in the country where you've got a ranch house and then a garage with a dwelling unit above it. It looks kind of weird sometimes.
It sounds weird to have the
Yeah,
ranch and a
yeah.
2.5-story.
So
I think
it seems-
it's partially dependent on the size of the lot, too. If it's set back,
if it is.
it's going to be less of an issue.
Right.
I noticed the same thing, and I thought, well, as a detached accessory building, it kind of makes sense. I see the rising tide of property values and perhaps that single-family structure becoming larger
Right.
over time. But it's a good point to talk about. I don't have an issue with it, but we'd have to really design it. We'd have to provide a building envelope where it fits larger and where it doesn't fit if it's,
Right, right.
do we want to do that?
No, but the solution might be, as Rick said, it's 25 feet or 75% of the height of the existing principal structure. Or like I did earlier, in the case of single-story structures no taller than the existing principal structure. That might be a good way to maintain consistency here to deal with the ranch situation and not encourage taller buildings to be built behind it.
Has there been an example that we could see, something that's been built or a historic example we could look at?
Of something larger behind
Yeah.
Not that I know of, but it probably exists. And
I think you can visualize what that could potentially look
Yes.
like. And there'd be some good scenarios where it's set back and landscaped and it's beautifully constructed, and there'll be some scenarios where there probably So you have to kind of imagine the range of scenarios that could occur. It does seem a little awkward to me, but it's a question to the group.
Well, at 25 feet, it's also not a tall building, so, you know, it is literally a garage with a space above it, possibly. Or a
Maybe the solution with a single-story structure is to have it further, push back
Distance.
further into the lot in order to diminish its height and the differential between the two, than to get rid of it, you know,
So some minimal building envelope
Yeah.
location.
maybe it has to be 20 or 30 feet back if you're in the situation.
And if not, no taller than the existing
But then when
structure.
we start to push things back, then I think one of the overall intents was to bring things closer together, because we start to push things back into setbacks, we start to push things back closer to the neighbors. It seems like we ought to think about what optimally we would look like and see to what degree we can bring these closer together, because we did make another adjustment, you may recall, that allowed these to be a little bit closer together, and the intent of that was really to draw it in. We've sort of made an assumption early on that attached things tend to have a little bit less of an impact, that, you know, and I think because they're essentially not encroaching closer to the neighbors. So I would just caution the group to, before we start to push things, a taller building back into, closer to the setback, closer to the neighbors, to think about what do we think would look acceptable.
So I agree with that, but the ideal is 20 feet, not 10, for cars to be in front of a 2.5-story structure, because the ADU isn't going to be 2.5 stories. There's going to be parking on the bottom. The ideal is 20, not 10. So I think if we were to push back for a single-story structure, a 2.5-story detached 20 feet, it would be totally appropriate and help take the curse off the potential differentiation in building height. And I think the other part of the separation reduction that we talked about, in my mind, it's more about flexibility for design rather than pulling it away from whatever.
See, that was a difference, because I thought that the bigger intention there was not, that was a benefit, but really was the idea of how can we draw these in a little closer and not push them out on the lot, because I think about, you know, a couple of recent ones, some of them saying it's too big and it's looming over my yard. And I feel like I have no privacy, and that at least what we've heard is that you know, the taller ones do seem to be, you know, the neighbors feel it more. It's closer to their yard, it's taller now, and we have a tight development pattern. So I realize that design may have been one of the benefits, but for my part, one of the benefits was to draw it in closer, to figure out a way that it is less visually and present to the neighbors.
You know, I think there's some really good points here, and I don't think we should dwell on it too much, but to your point, Beverly, if the building were allowed to go to 25 feet, maybe that should be its setback, its minimum setback from property lines. That's a standard in many locations. The building height becomes the setback, so that would help provide some space, whereas most of the setbacks in these neighborhoods are 10 and 15 feet, so it would provide more of a buffer for the neighbors. I think we've identified something to talk about.
Right. It's an excellent point, and if we actually want to achieve that, we need to talk about maximums, not minimums, because all we've established so far is a minimum setback, not a maximum. So there's no driver for the design team to move it closer to the existing structure, other than the ability to the code to allow it to be 5 feet or 10
Could this,
feet.
I mean, I don't want to solve this problem today because we may not be able to, but could there just be additional language saying for, you know, for every however many feet that it exceeds the height of the primary structure, it shall be set back an additional X amount of
Possibility.
feet from the
Yep,
setback?
Sliding scale.
Yeah.
I think that's a good idea.
So for every 10 feet or whatever that would
Every
be.
foot. you
For
know,
every foot that
I
it's
think
taller than
yeah.
the principal structure, it needs to be so many feet.
Additionally, shall increase the setback from the property line. Okay, that might be the way.
Okay, so the next section there is the footprint, which is under 534. The maximum footprint of the existing structure containing the detached ADU shall be no greater than 750 square feet. So if your ADU is detached ADU sitting on the ground, it can be no larger of a footprint than 750 square foot. feet. There are volume, and we've already gone over the height constraints. If you do a two-car garage with the set of stairs, you're going to need pretty much most of 750 square feet to have the two cars park and have the dedicated room with the stairway that meets code. To get up to the second floor, you would have, in that case, close to a 750 square foot second floor for your detached ADU, and then again, you'd have the attic left over, which really rolls into 535, which is the volume standard that says the detached ADU shall be no greater than 2,000 square feet or 75% of the building volume of the principal structure, whichever's less. So the 2,000 square feet, it isn't magic, but it's essentially a 750 square foot footprint times 2.5 with utilization of the attic potentially if a conditional use permit's granted to go to 1,000 square feet for the detached ADU. They'd be able to go into the attic and into that roof and utilize some of that space. So that's where that number comes from in 535. If you really do the math, it's 1,875 square feet if you did the 750, but we rounded up.
We rounded up for ease.
But there is the
Thought there'd be
limit,
more questions about that, so we
Yeah.
just rounded it up. But yeah.
but there is the limiting factor that it's or 75% of the volume of the building in front of it. So you can run into the ranch here again, where you're not going to be able to utilize much of the 2,000 square feet if you're in a pretty small structure on the front, 1,500 square feet. You're going to be at 1,100 square feet for your volume of your entire structure with the ADU. So it's either a 700 up to 750 sitting on the ground, or it's up to 1,100 with a two-car garage with a set of stairs in the back of it and 500 square feet on the second floor.
Everything you said made complete sense. You're using two terms, though,
Okay?
gross floor area and volume.
Okay.
Do you mean gross floor area, the principal structure?
Yeah.
Yes.
The 2,000
To me,
square
they're
feet is
synonymous. The volume is defined by GFA.
Probably to me, they're synonymous too, but let's think of Attorney Dewey Cheatham and Howe suing the city over this, and, how are they going to interpret it?
Yeah.
Because 2,000 square foot GFA is not a volume, right, is what you're saying?
No, it is a volume. That's
Just
how I
using
define
consistent-
volume, and we need to define volume the same way with the principal structure. They both,
GFA is area, so it's not volume. Volume is area times height, right?
okay.
So this is, the GFA is a two-dimensional
Right.
measure, whereas volume is a three-dimensional measure. So I think that's the question
Right.
you're asking.
Right.
And so, it's a really good point. So it's really, this is like,
It ties into another question I had about gross living area versus gross floor area, because those are two different terms as
but
well.
before we get to that, it's good, but could this be the gross floor area of the entire structure? Shall be no greater than 75%?
I think that's what he meant,
Yeah,
yeah.
that is what I meant.
So we should do
Yeah.
that instead. So we'll make that change.
Gross living area, what do you want to say about that?
Well, it ties into the detached accessory dwelling unit inside a larger structure, which this gets to. So maybe we just touched on it and don't need to go there.
Okay.
Just as a side point, which is not specifically rated at this point, but I've been noticing that we go back and forth between structure and building is defined as a particular kind of structure. So I would suggest, as we go through this, we change most of the words structure to building, because then it'll be all
Use
consistent.
building, not structure.
Because
Yeah.
building is something that something
Yeah,
is
right.
inside, yeah.
Yeah. Good. Okay, the roof dormer piece, I think, is next in 536. And again, the idea, I put this in here because I think it's important. You may not. If you're going to allow people to ask for a conditional use permit to go into their roof and establish a living space, my biggest fear is that, okay, Corey, I'll be right there. That we avoid the situation where the temptation on the design team to put two full shed dormers in the attic of that 2.5-story structure, in essence making it a 3-story structure visually. So limiting the dormers to 33% of each roof surface, which is, there's typically two on these, two surfaces on a gable-ended building. And if somebody's going to go into an attic of a relatively small footprint, they're likely going to use a gable form of roof. They can only dormer 33% of each side. And this is, again, in my mind, presuming it's not in the setbacks. It's a conforming location. And that allows room for the stairway to get up and perhaps a bathroom to be there, whatever, you know. Again, it's a maximum, not a minimum. But I think it protects the character of many of our neighborhoods to not have what so many people do, which is put in a full shed dormer right out to the outside wall. And in fact, we might want to consider making the, if I didn't already, I know I thought about it, in the architectural design standards, dormer placement is equally as important as the volume of the dormer. You know, whether it's recessed from the sides and the bottom of the roof really changes the character. And I thought I wrote that down. I don't see it in there anymore, so I'd throw that out there for consideration. I think dormers can completely make or break a building. So that's the spirit of inserting 536. That's really just the sort of maximum area, but I think we should maybe add a sentence to that speaks to step backs from the edge of the roof.
So Nick, this dormers, I'm just wondering whether this is even necessary, because you've got the guideline of roof forms have to match the principal structure.
Right.
So if the principal structure doesn't have dormers, you couldn't have dormers in the EDU.
No, that's not, well, I don't think we want to say that. I think we want to say if there are dormers on the principal structure, you should be consistent in your design of those. And this gets into well, what happens if it's bad to begin with? I don't have an answer for that. But, so that's a good question to mull over for another day, is what do you do with something that's really poorly designed? Do you exacerbate it by religiously following the standards?
Do you replicate?
Do you replicate bad things? But your question is, can you actually introduce something new to your building that isn't on the principal structure? And I would say we don't want to have it be that restrictive that you can't. So if the language needs to be, you know, there's a dormer can be added, and they're added all the time to structures that have no dormers. And if they're done in the appropriate style of the original structure, they look perfectly fine.
By roof form, didn't you mean, Nick, the pitch of the roof?
Yes,
More
the
than
shape.
The shape
Yep.
of the roof, not necessarily whether or not it had a dormer. So I think, Rick, by asking the question, I think you pointed out the need for some
Definition, because
explanation
it
or
says
definition.
roof forms, slopes, and shingling material, so it's more than the slope. It's
Right.
something else.
So,
I think,
Corey,
should we
speak.
let Corey jump?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
So Nick, just to clarify, the consistency standards or compatibility standards say if you choose to provide this, it should match it. If it exists on the principal structure, they should be compatible, or they should be,
Why is it
reflective
saying
of that. But you may introduce a new design feature that is not currently on, and this provides an opportunity to introduce a design feature that's not currently on the principal structure. So that if it doesn't exist, that you may include dormer because it is a desirable design feature that we're essentially encouraging a new departure, a new design feature that's not on the original structure because it does enhance the appearance of the ADU. And is this the only design feature you'd want to permit?
Probably not, so I need to think about it.
Yeah.
I think you could.
Because otherwise, all the other ones are essentially saying,
Would
if
say
you
no to a
provide,
chimney.
it needs
Yeah.
to match. But
Yeah.
there's two different standards.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Corey.
Thanks, everyone. One thing, I just want to jump quickly back to point 534, the 750 square feet. Does that conflict with what we're saying in the original table, 1.224, that you can still get a conditional use permit if you have over 750 square feet DADU?
No, because we are just saying that the base footprint can't be larger than that, but you could have 2 stories, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So
Okay,
to-
gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. I'm sorry.
So, but to Corey's point,
The footprint can't.
yeah,
Correct. The footprint of the structure can't be bigger than 750 square feet.
which I think is an appropriate ceiling. It's a big footprint. Most structures, most single-family homes in Portsmouth are not greater than that for a footprint. But to Corey's point, is, and we don't have to answer it now, but is there any utility in having that 1,000 square feet? What if it is 800 because it's appropriate, it's a conditional use permit to get the excess over 750 up to 1,000? Do we want to force people into a multi-story structure if 800 might make it work? You know what I'm saying?
'Cause we are right now.
We're precluding that right now.
We are right now.
Yeah, so anyway, it's a thought, I don't have the answer, but,
Good point.
so, thanks, Corey. Corey, did you have anything else on that, or?
The only other thing, just on the two-story, you know, I think the discussion was good, but I, you know, just want to make sure that we're still allowing two-story garage with an ADU above it to occur when you only have a single story to begin with. I just don't want to, you know, penalize people with single stories just because they don't have a two-story, yet your neighbor across the street with a two-story can do a two-story. So that's all. I just want to make sure that it's fair to the board.
Thanks, that's a good point. Go ahead.
And also, it kind of goes back to, you know, what do we allow for just accessory buildings? You know, as of right now, you can do, you know, most certainly do a two-story garage, even if you have a one-story, as long as you're within the height constraints, so.
That's
Right. I
another-
think we're
that's a
leaning
topic.
towards the step back option and not precluding a multi-story structure behind a single-story structure. And I think Rick Chelman's comment about the fact that over the next 20 to 30 years, many of these single-story structures will either be replaced with taller structures or they'll be expanded in an upward way just because of what's happening in the market. It's happening in other jurisdictions. So nobody's building single-story structures anymore. We pretty much know that. Okay.
So we don't allow modification of any of the standards in 5.3. Currently, right now, these are the standards we're just reviewing. And so I think it's the subordination standards for DADUs. So I'm just wondering, is there, yeah, I don't see that in 10.814.80, which is on page 12. In granting conditional use permit, for the planning board may modify standards set forth in 40, 52. And I recognize that we're going to consolidate the consistency or compatibility standards, but the subordination standards are still going to probably be separate. So did we intend for 5.3 to be also modified?
Under the back?
Under modification opportunities, we added some clarification there.
I'm kind of thinking not. But the whole idea was to create something tighter here and not put the board in the position of having to look at waiver requests repeatedly for those.
Right.
I think we tighten them up further if we were going to do that. But I do think, to Corey's point, we may want to have some ability for the footprint, maybe not, to be a little bit larger without this being necessarily a waiver or inserting that at the back. However, the 1,000 is working, 1,000 square foot maximum, which is earlier in the ordinance. It's before the attached or detached, right? It's in the introduction.
We do cap it at 1,000.
Yeah, no, there's,
That's on detached,
Yeah.
pretty sure.
yeah.
Yeah, attached are all 750 square feet. It's only detached that there's an option to go up higher than that.
So is that under 511 there on page 9? Near the top?
Or did we take that out altogether?
I see it there, so it's there. In no case shall a detached ADU be larger than 1,000 square feet. And I guess above it. So we need to just make sure that clause is consistent with what we end up saying below.
Preparing the checklist I mentioned earlier might help with
Yep.
checking this sort of a thing. This is feeling like we need a work session to talk about these details.
That's what we're kind of.
Yeah, we're kind of doing that, but it's more than we're going to get done. We've identified things. We're not going to solve them today unless we go till 2 o'clock this afternoon.
I
And I'm
can't
not
stay
going to do that.
All right, well, I'll try and speed up then. 537 is simply acknowledgement of section 10, 13, 20, which is the drainage requirements that you not increase the flow and volume on your abutting neighbor's property. It's the existing ordinance. It's, again, a flag for the design team and the applicant that, hey, if you're doing a detached ADU, it's typically behind the structure. It's in the backyard. There's a lot of backyards that are lower, and drainage problems are easy to create, and we certainly don't want to have people unwillingly or unknowingly do that without recognizing their obligations to their neighbors. The same with the lighting, just, it's the dark sky requirements, just to make it, it's particularly important when you're putting a structure in the backyard of a neighborhood, that the lights be dark sky. So the 37 and 38 are just acknowledgements of existing code requirements that apply anyway, but they're maybe not obvious to somebody using the code. The design guidelines, as I discussed earlier, and we all did, need some wordsmithing, I guess, to be more accessible, but they're the same here as the attached ADUs, and we may want to,
The additions, yeah.
yeah, we may want to differentiate between the two. We, you know, the notes I have is, what do we do to prevent repeating bad design that exists? Number 3, you know, how do we add new design features clearly and allow that to happen, provided they're still consistent with the principal structure? And then the piece about the dormers, do we include some setback requirements on those? So I think that rounds out. We've got the code, the building code requirements now establishing the minimum separation between the structures. Again, to me, this is maximizing flexibility from a design standpoint. The building code's going to allow things to be 5 feet apart almost in every instance at a minimum. So it's a lot more flexibility to the design. I guess the next piece is the administrative approvals for the
Which hasn't really
attached and
changed.
detached.
Yep. And then we took out the garden cottage altogether.
I know, I'm trying to capture things that are still pending, because I know that we can still work those out. I know that Council Moreau has a timeline that she has associated with this, because there are other things coming up behind the items I have so far. And I think we can make these, some of these wordsmithing corrections and resend it out to the group for comment and post as well. 814535, convert volume to GFA. And then I also have 814535, for every foot of height that exceeds the principal structure, there shall be an additional foot of setback, and I think that we can make that change. 814534, allow some variation criteria to that 750, so this could additional square footage would be allowed under the certain circumstances. Maybe you can help write some of that, Nick. And then if these are the 3 I have so far, I can create a list, and I think some of them we've resolved a little bit of the wordsmithing, but I think some might need a little bit of tooling and then maybe resending out so that do you think that, I'm just asking Councilor Moreau, it could be handled that way, or it could be work sessioned again. I'll look to you to guide how you'd like that to be handled.
Yeah, I think that, because there's going to be more work sessions moving forward in other groups and getting more input. So let's make those changes and send it out to this group and see if they think it's ready to move on for the next review process, because it's going to be reviewed many, many, many more times.
How did we feel about the detached accessory dwelling units being administrative review or conditional use permit? Right at the beginning.
You're talking about the 1.221?
The replacement for the garden, yeah, the replacement for the garden cottages.
I think because it's in an existing structure, you're not changing anything. It's the same thing as within your house. You still have to meet parking requirements, but you're allowed to just take an existing structure and change it. You're not changing anything on the outside. So I sort of see it the same way as you have a house and, you know, one story's going to be one unit, the second story is going to be another unit, that sort of thing. You're not really making an outward change.
I get that. I just see a difference between somebody who's attached to my dwelling with a door that's required, so it's literally, right there, like an extra bedroom, versus in the backyard by itself, where the rowdy kids might be. So I do see a difference because we're putting people in there as opposed to things. So,
We've gone back and forth on this one as well, and we figured we're going to leave it this way for the moment, and then let's try to figure out and get some feedback from it and see what other people say as well.
okay, well, I'm saying I don't agree with you, so
Okay.
I don't know how we resolve that.
Well, I think you're saying is that let's, we're going to start here because it was a reduction of the barrier and recognizing that process barriers are some of the biggest challenges and the risk associated with those, so that the least impactful units, the ones that are already no new construction, it's just conversion of the interior space, are the least impactful, that is the only place that we felt like the barrier could be loosened up. Arguably, we've added a lot of standards, I think, except for the lot area change that we've clarified, that the units are going to be seen as, rather than requiring the lot size of 2 dwelling units, that we're going to see them as a single dwelling unit in terms of lot size requirements, which is a big barrier removal. This is really the only, I think, substantive barrier removal that we've introduced. Whether this holds, and the compatibility standards have been basically how we've treated those. And we've also really capped those garden cottages where before, and I did it recently, said, well, it's still, they can expand the unit as long as it's still within that original 600 feet contemplated. And I don't know that this actually says, no, you actually can't. You cannot expand it. Whatever's on site is on site. So these two being the lowest bars are the first removal, is really where we've moved a barrier. If it doesn't hold, then the public will, I guess, decide, the council will decide, planning board will decide if this really is worth, if these don't move to a CUP. So I think it's just a good starting place, recognizing we still are at the beginning. And I can definitely look to the planning board to, if they have additional questions they want fielded out to stakeholders, I think it's really appropriate to have a circle back with your stakeholder groups. A lot of the public input's coming in. Stakeholder groups, they gave us original input. I think if there is a question about, is this problematic, send it out to the abutters. Go ahead, same list that we used before. Send it out to the applicants, send it out to the architects, and let's just get that feedback loops, because you should do circle back.
Go ahead, Corey.
Yeah, I tend to agree that, it's within an existing structure, both attached and detached, that we should allow administrative approval. Do you think maybe changing 1.221 in the table that allows the approval to also include that accessory building has to comply with the setback requirements, so that, you don't have a building right up, that doesn't comply, and yet you're changing that into a, in other words, a shed that's right on the property line, changing that into a ADU versus, something that meets the setback requirements?
So it's an interesting question. So this is the old garden cottage provision, which was meant to apply to existing accessory buildings that do not meet necessarily the setback requirements for a principal structure, but presumably do meet the 5 foot. Is it 5 foot setback for a what's the setback for an accessory building?
Well,
Small
they're
accessory
only
building.
100 square feet, the 5
Okay,
foot, so
yeah.
none of those would have.
So I guess the question is, it should be a conforming accessory building.
That's what he's saying.
Yeah, so that's what we should, it's not necessarily the setback for a principal structure, right? Or is it?
That seems like a really important distinction
Yeah.
between a structure, because we all know, many of the existing accessory structures that are larger than the 100 square feet are in this side and rear yard setbacks. And so I think what Corey is suggesting is maybe the as of right be limited to conforming accessory structures that exist,
Right.
not non-conforming, which
That's-
probably is way more sensitive to the neighbors.
I think that makes a lot of sense, too.
Go ahead, Corey.
Was I right, Corey?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, basically, the abutters, rights I guess, affected obviously more than the setback. So, making sure that building complies with all the requirements. Yeah, you got it right, Nick. Thank you.
So
So I don't know what the group thinks of that.
So we do a CUP if it's a
so
non-conforming.
maybe add a line.
existing.
Yeah, it'd be another use.
It'd be like, it would
maybe.
be, yeah, I think you could add a line there that says that conforms to all,
Conforming
setbacks, existing setbacks for the district, and then the next line would be a CUP, those that don't conform. I think that's
Would fit
very,
into, probably you'd modify 1222 to include not just an expansion, but
That's good.
existing structure that's within the setbacks.
Yeah.
Oh,
What's a conditional use permit either
yeah.
way?
Yeah, it just adds, 221 just becomes that conform to all setbacks, 222 would be
Would be where they'd go otherwise.
expansions and also.
I guess that's, that, you could do that. I guess the question is, to Corey's point, if the building is right on the property line and you allow a conditional use permit for it, do you have any justification for not granting the conditional use permit if it doesn't have to comply with anything in terms of setbacks?
All the other criteria, all the other
It has to
criteria.
meet all the other criteria, but
Yeah.
if it meets all the other criteria, then you really have to approve something that's on the property line.
Just setback wouldn't be one of the criteria.
Okay, if that's what you want, I guess that's the question.
So right now, do we require variances for everybody with an existing garden cottage that's in a setback to get a variance before they come to the planning board for conditional use?
Only if you expand.
Only if you expand,
Yeah,
that's my
so
understanding.
we'd be maintaining the status quo
Mm-hmm.
if we still only apply a conditional use permit.
So they would still need a variance and a conditional use
No,
permit?
I just heard we don't require variance.
It doesn't,
If you're inside an existing
expand
building
it.
that is non-conforming for setback and you wanted to convert it, you wouldn't need a variance because of the setback
Today.
issue. Today.
It's existing.
It's existing. You're not, if you wanted to expand a millimeter into the setback, you need a
Then you
variance.
need one.
That's what I'm saying.
So
That's
we
not-
keep that, Rick.
that's
We
not,
would-
we're not affecting that at
Yeah.
all.
We're not changing that.
But I guess, so in this table, what's missing from this table is, it's obviously you never have this in the table because this always assumes that you're
Yeah.
complying with zoning. But, so for an existing accessory building that you're expanding, if it complies with all zoning requirements, then it just needs a conditional use permit. But if it doesn't, it would need a variance.
It would be permitted if it
If it's
complies.
conforming, it's permitted.
That's
If
what
it's
Corey was suggesting.
non-conforming,
It's existing
conditional
and
use.
not, no expansion proposed.
It's just like,
existing.
it's just
I'm
like.
saying
the-
there is an expansion
It's
proposed.
just
Okay.
like,
That's a
Sorry,
different
then.
category.
it's just like 223, Rick, on the next page, where you've got conforming and non-conforming, you've got two different things. I
Yeah,
think.
so you're right, Rick. You're going to need a new line item.
You need to add a new line.
A third
right.
line?
I think you're going to need a
You
third
need a new
line.
line for because of what you just said.
So,
Yeah.
so the new line is for
Up to
up to 600 square feet and not,
And non-conforming.
Non-conforming.
well, why, but no, it doesn't, so what are we changing the
In an
C?
existing, no expansion.
So 1222, are we changing that at all?
If it's conforming, what they're saying, I don't agree with this, but what is being said is, if it conforms with setbacks in an existing building, you don't need a conditional use permit.
That's
So-
that's
So
1221.
the only thing, you should
Correct,
add a
Rick.
line to
If you-
1221.
If you do not conform with setbacks, then you do need a conditional use
Right, but
permit.
the question I'm asking is on 1.222, which is an existing accessory building that we're expanding. That is not changing, right, in terms of what you have here,
Correct.
CSUSU?
I think you're splitting
correct.
1221 into two pieces.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's the one that conforms,
You need
that
a
is
new
permitted
line
by
item.
right, the one that is
We need
not.
1221A and
Conforming
B.
and non-conforming.
Yeah.
But what is, I guess, I'm.
So I
not
think,
clear.
Rick, the 1221B, which doesn't exist here yet, call this 1A, leave it the way it is, except add that it has
As
to be
conforming.
conforming.
Okay, so it's an entirely within and non-conforming.
You got
Both
it.
of those, it's
Yes.
it's a
Okay.
two-prong
Yeah.
test, yeah.
Okay,
Sorry, wasn't clear.
so add CU for,
All right. Anything else with the group?
Thanks, Corey.
Or I guess I had one question. I was just curious, the reasoning behind we're striking the more than two bedrooms in 750 square feet.
Thank you for bringing that up, because that was one of the questions that we
We've
went
gone back and forth on that
Yeah.
So-
20 times.
It's just a question about whether, and it's a question that actually I made a note that we were supposed to ask you. So we asked you last week, do we want to limit it to two bedrooms if we have all these limitations on size? And I think we heard there was not really a strong feeling that we needed to do that. But then we spoke about it yesterday, and we were sort of split as a group. I think that language should stand because they are accessory dwelling units and we're really not trying. But others felt like it, we have the limit, all the other limitations that are in place that limit the size, compatibility, all those things. So really the question is, we're going to repose that question to you again. Would you like to cap it at 2 bedrooms, or would we like to just let all the other standards play out, and if you can make it work, make it work? So that's just, we'll ask you again.
I just envisioned some sort of weird, like, dormitory scenario or something, sorry. I just envisioned some sort of weird dormitory scenario, where someone's trying to, I don't know, pack as many people in as they can, and I don't see any other limitations that would limit that. I just see that fear. I see how that could be perceived.
We can put it back in. Let me,
Yeah.
we just figured the overall size of it kind of limits you already. So
Yeah.
the theory is the bedrooms really don't affect anything else. Like our parking's based off of square footage, everything's measured in a different way.
Yeah.
So I think that was, if you want 2 tiny little bedrooms because you've got 2 kids and you're a single mom, then, or
Yeah.
dad, you'd have that option, right? Of having that sort of structure. But we certainly can put a bedroom max on it. I know it's literally split, and everyone you talk to, you get a different opinion.
And yet sometimes our opinions change from week to week. So 2-bedroom max, in or out? I'd just like to poll the group to see whether we should.
Well, I'd like to add a subset.
Go ahead, Sarah.
So one option, could the accessory unit have no greater number of bedrooms than the dwelling that it's an accessory to?
We could. I think that becomes more complex than,
I think that's a lot more complex.
because it's defining a bedroom, in the real estate world, we define bedrooms as a room with a closet. So, yeah.
Yeah.
I would like to see 1 bedroom allowed by administrative permit, up to 2 bedrooms with conditional use permit. So 2 standards. So that existing 600 square foot cottage or accessory building you want to convert, if it has 1 bedroom, you can do it by just seeing the planning director. If you want to put 2 bedrooms in there, you're going to have to get a conditional use permit, because that is more of a change to the neighborhood. It's not about planning board control here. I'm concerned about neighbors and changing the character of a neighborhood, giving them a chance to have a hearing. It's a big
You're still
difference.
capping it at 2, are you not?
Yes. It's an accessory. It's not a detached additional dwelling unit. Like, there's separate criteria for that. That can be separately sold and all those good things.
I just want to make sure. So it'd be 1 bedroom, but then a conditional use permit for 2?
Right.
So I just want to make a note that most of the ones we see do come in at 2. I want to say that even the ones that are designed to serve the elderly couple, often they want 2 bedrooms. It is just the nature. So it would be making a standard that is already kind of capped at 2 more onerous. So I just want to alert the group to that. So.
Well, I'd want to make it so it's not onerous. I think it should be, I'm not talking about a huge administrative process here by either method. I'm back to, again, I see a need to simplify this language that we sort of jumped over. You and I agreed on it, but when you were summarizing, it wasn't touched on again. I think the language needs to be simplified and consolidated somewhat. It's redundant in places, but with respect to the allowed by administrative permit versus conditional use permit, I think, I suggested a tiered conditional use permit process. I don't know that it's gotten much traction, so if we just have, it's an on-off switch, you either have one or you don't, but make it a simple process, again, back to the checklist for the landowner. And if it comes down to they've got a lot of checks on the left, maybe that means they have to hire an engineer or an attorney, but if it's all checks on the right, they just do it themselves.
I'm fine putting in the 2-bedroom maximum. I question whether or not we have a split on CUP or permitted based off of a bedroom count.
Well, I don't doubt we have a split, because I'm the only one who's mentioned it.
But yeah, we can put the 2. Go ahead, Corey.
I just wanted to mention to Rick, I'm having a little trouble hearing him, but also I think, to Rick's point, as far as kind of a tiered conditional use, one thing that we want to definitely keep in our minds is that, even if we I think what Rick was thinking when the whole tiered conditional use is that if a homeowner has to come in before the board, you know, we want to make them comfortable that they can do it themselves. So even if we, you know, we kind of move away from administrative approval, keep conditional, I think, you know, the mindset of having a tiered approach of the checklist is to make homeowners more comfortable that they themselves can come in front of the board. They don't have to hire an attorney or an engineer or an architect to do it for them, which certainly helps reduce the overall cost in getting this done.
Yeah, I agree with that. What I was saying, Corey, was having allowed by right or administrative permit a one-bedroom in an existing structure and a two-bedroom limit on the others. That's what I was trying to say. But I agree with what you just said.
I'm okay just putting a 2-bedroom back in.
I just want to speak to the checklist. So I do think it is, I mean, tiered to a certain degree, that the lowest level, that it is permitted by right, and then almost most other things do require conditional use permit. And it seems to me we get the biggest pushback on the administrative approval, and so that bar is actually pretty high for what gets is permitted by right. Almost, I'd say 90% are going to require a CUP. There's going to be just a few that could probably come in. I haven't seen any existing dwelling, and we've done a few, and I haven't seen any existing attached conversions. I haven't seen that. And I haven't seen a garden cottage that has come in without a modification to the garden cottage. I haven't seen either one of these is permitted by right. I haven't seen it yet. I have not seen those. So I guess in terms of the checklist, I think that the code is organized the way it's organized. What we can do as a companion document is also, and maybe this could be a table created within the document that I could work on between now and then, that just really lays out the different options. Do you have this CUP? Do you have this, but there's, most of it is a CUP. There's really only a couple instances that are going to be permitted by right. And I haven't seen those occur since I've been here, and I think I've done 4, and I've got a couple coming. I know that we've got one on the next agenda, and there's one that's working its way through now. So I don't think we'll see that, but I understand the need for a checklist and the simplification, and I think what everybody's saying, please do something that helps people, and maybe it's a table within this document that can be created between now and the end, or maybe it's a special, and I've seen those that really just lay it out so somebody can look at a table instead of navigating are you doing this? This is how you do it. Are you doing this? This is going to require CUP. Are you doing this? So I know that what I'm hearing is this is a lot, and how can we simplify it? So I'm hearing you, and I'm just trying to figure out ways to do that without restructuring our code.
I think the checklist and table should be separate, because otherwise it's going to make this bigger. And I think you could, so I've said enough.
What do you think about?
I think we should keep the more than 2 bedrooms in there, and then.
So we'll put that back in. Anyone else? Any other input before I let the public start giving their input? Seems good there. All right. If anyone from the public would like to come up and add to our very long, lengthy conversation. Just make sure you state your name and address for the record and speak into the microphone, please.
I think I can take this off. My name is Elizabeth Bratter, property owner, 159 McDonough Street. Great conversations going on here today. The one thing that we talked about in the very beginning was identifying what the use of an ADU is. And obviously, based on the fact that it was discussed as to whether or not it could be used as an office, that means an ADU is no longer an ADU. So to me, an ADU, the purpose of allowing ADUs to be more easily constructed, or the permitting process, is for residential use. And I think that needs to be clearly put in there. It's not for you to put an office in or to have a home office. It's strictly for you to allow someone to live there. I do feel strongly that even in the process where you can permit your way through, that there should be a requirement as that process that at least your direct abutters are notified, that you have to bring in, or you have to request of your abutters that they are aware of the fact that you're getting ready to do this. I don't know how you can do it, but it's just a thought. I think you guys already covered, I think Corey brought up about the construction, the things. Again, we talked about so I think that the one about home occupation makes sense because an ADU is not for home occupation. It's for the purpose of providing housing. Parking is not on either list, and I didn't see it anywhere in here, and I'm a big parking proponent, so I think that if you're going to put an ADU in, especially if you're going to have 2 bedrooms, you better have enough parking. The garage thing is, I don't necessarily agree with the 9-foot garage, because if you take a left off of Islington Street and you go into where those Campanelli houses are, they're called something else here in New Hampshire, but that whole area has what I call the big garage doors, and a lot of them are big in Elwyn Park as well. So there are a lot of single-family homes that have those big garage doors, so I'm not really sure that that needs to be part of that. All right, that was about the things. I'm sorry, I'm trying to get through all my notes. I agree that 4534 and 4535 seem to have a little bit of a conflict in terms of understanding what is going on there. It sounded like you're going to try to reword that to make it better, but it definitely had some issues with that. I'm also concerned about the building heights. In our neighborhood, the building height is 35 feet, but the majority, about a large portion of the buildings, even the Safeway storage down in Islington Creek, is only 32 feet tall. So if you're allowed to use 75% of that, not that there's room in our area to put ADUs, but if you're going to, just as an example, if you're going to make it 75%, that's still going to be a pretty tall building compared to maybe something smaller in the front. So I'm more concerned about that. And building height is measured to the roof line. So you could put in you could put in 25 feet, which is taller than what one of our buildings is down there, and you could add a big old roof on there. And even though the roof matches, you could have a lot of space there. So I think that the height really needs to be thought about differently. I'm not really comfortable with the 25%. I'm not really sure about 25 feet compared to what's allowed in that neighborhood. So it might need to be adjusted by the actual code for the neighborhood, because each neighborhood has a different amount of height. I don't know if that's standard all the way around the neighborhood.
They're all 35 feet.
They're all 35, okay. So in regards to the dormers and all that stuff, I thought the dormers pretty well were covered in the lists, the 2 lists, but in regards to the ADU being on top of a garage and then having something on top of that that has dormers in it, now I'm thinking that you're adding 2 stories to a garage, because you're going to add dormers in the top and now you're going to have a 2-story ADU. So I'm not sure if that should be regulated or not. I'm just putting it out there to think about, that you could create a 2-story ADU. It would be, its square footage, its footprint would still only be 750 square feet. You're allowing the maximum area to be 2,000, but what if I just added an ADU and I didn't put a garage underneath it? So if I just put in a 2-story ADU of 2,000 square feet.
You can't. You're limited to 1,000 under the conditional use
Okay,
permit.
that's total area.
So it'd be a
for the-
story and a half
Okay,
is what you
all
could
right,
do.
just
And
making sure
the
of
2
that.
stories is 2.5.
Because when you get all into this, it gets a little confusing sometimes. I think I got everything. I'm not sure. Just want to check one more page, sorry. Okay, that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else? Come up and talk into the microphone, name and address for the record.
Good morning, everybody. Greg Mahana, 3 Pheasant Lane, Portsmouth. I'll try to be brief. One of the things that you guys might find useful, which I've personally looked at, is how the surrounding communities do this. They have some really good checklists. They've got some really good simplified plans, and there's way too many ingredients in this cake. Everybody's doing it in a different way. I know you already mentioned, so I won't talk about it, but the simple checklist to start the document on ADUs, so the layman can figure this out, because I listened to the public comment. You already solicited revisited all that, and I can't remember how many times they said simple. The tiered approach, there should be, I know that we haven't had those yet, probably because they don't know that the mechanism doesn't exist, but an ADU in a box. Let's call it an ADU in a box. If you immediately already meet all these requirements, you shouldn't have to come to the planning board. Show us that does this, and that's an ADU in a box. I know we haven't had any yet, but that's because we don't have the process. The home office thing, we really got to figure this out. I can tell you from a homeowner, I have a home business, two of them actually. My wife has a personal training studio in the basement. It's allowed. And if you have a 750 square foot ADU, there are things that you can do in there. I don't care if you want to use a little craft manufacturing thing like my daughter does, who is an occupational therapist. She makes things in there. That's a home business. Also, as a landlord, because you live in the front, you can rent the back, that kind of a thing. I have so many tenants that are working from home now. They're consulting, they're doing design work, they're doing engineering work, they're doing web design. These are kinds of businesses that don't generate traffic, which is obviously a concern, and the parking situation. But I think we got to expand. You guys mentioned that there is a home occupation definition elsewhere. Drill into that and figure this out, because it's going to be a third rail with everybody trying to work from home. Going into Nick's criteria in exterior design, I think it's 10.814. Too many numbers on here. I just caution, I think they're all bullet points, and I think there was 11. I just caution the level of detail here, and I'll give you the reason why. Garage doors. I have a 2-car garage with a single door because of the setbacks on the left and the right side of my house. I couldn't put a 2-car garage in with 2 doors. It didn't fit. And I can comfortably put a full-size 4-door and a full-size SUV in a 2-car garage with a single door. And also, as it was mentioned, if you drive through Elwyn Park, there are many 2-car single-door garages, and so there is a consistency here that we have to look at. The cost, that's another piece of this puzzle. So if you look at those 11 bullet points and you try to say that, look, your ADU has to match, whether it's detached or attached, it's the same thing. You have to match significant design points. Well, if you were fortunate enough to buy a wonderful house somewhere in the South End that has some really cool architectural design, including copper gutters and some really expensive big windows, and it's really kind of cool. But part of this whole ADU thing is to try and bring the cost of additional housing down. So you want to put a 750 square foot box out back for grandma or your kids that boomeranged back from college, whatever. Don't make them put copper gutters on it. You can't buy them anymore. You can't put, copper flashing. You know what that stuff costs? It's ridiculous. So if you've got that on the primary residence, you're going to build a Taj Mahal of a shed out back that has copper gutters, copper flashing, and let's not talk about slate roofs. If you happen to have a wonderful house in the South End that has a slate roof, no friggin' way are you going to put slate roof on a shed. That's silly. Same thing with windows. I mean, I'm fortunate enough to own a historic building in another town. It's got 80-inch tall windows. It was owned by the Wentworth family. It was their summer home. If I wanted to put an ADU next to that, I can't do floor-to-ceiling windows. It's just not practical. And yes, the idea would be to have them look similar, but it's a cost thing. It would disqualify. If you have a unique primary, it'll disqualify an ADU from a financial standpoint. Sorry, trying to move quick. It's Friday. That was a good discussion about 750 square feet of footprint versus 2,000 square feet of gross floor area. And I think you need to change the definitions here because it's all about volume. And you guys kind of bounced around gross living area. A garage is typically not gross living area because it's not heated and air conditioned. Breezeways are not gross living area because they're not heated and air conditioned. From a building standpoint and a building regulation standpoint, gross living area is heated and air conditioned. Gross floor area is not. Breezeways and garages don't count. Okay, that was that. The 2-bedroom max. Drill into this. I think you got to keep the 2-bedroom max. As a landlord and a developer, flipper, buyer, real estate person, there are existing situations in the city of Portsmouth where, and I'm not going to say this from a discriminatory way, but owners of Asian restaurants love to buy up properties that have bedrooms and stack them full of people. I've been approached before on this. There's a home on Ocean Road that is nothing but, 20 people living in a 4-bedroom house. So the ability to take something and stick a whole bunch of little rooming rooms things in there exists. Whether you don't think it's going to happen or not, it exists. And so stick to that. Nobody really talked about this one, but the certificate should have to be inspected and renewed annually. That's been tried in other places. Myself, as a landlord, other towns where I've operated and have kind of gone into that, and it becomes onerous more for the city than us, to be perfectly honest with you, because you got to have the people, you got to have the paperwork, you got to have. That should be looked at because it's going to be onerous. And in other towns where I've worked in, they ended up scrapping it because it was onerous. So.
That's what we do now, yeah.
Those are my comments. Thanks. Happy Friday.
It is onerous.
Thank you.
You're right about that, Greg.
Good morning, Petra Huda, 280 South Street. I am speaking to you as the layperson, and this is not simple. I urge you to look at all of the communities around you and look at simplifying everything. I think you have a lot of redundancies in here that have been discussed. You go through all of the qualifications in the beginning, and then at the end, in the 70s, you repeat it again in simplified motion. So in the 10, 8, 1, 4, 6, 0, and 7, 0. Okay, I also had a hard time following between what I made my notes on yesterday that was online and then the changes that were made. It's not simple, guys. I also had a hard time following you here because you made changes that weren't in there. So help. The layperson is struggling here. The stuff in the back is redundant to everything you had in the front. I totally agree with having a list that says if you want to do this, then you need this and this and this to make it totally simplified. I think you had some really good points about deliveries. I think the 2-bedroom limitation is good. I think you still need to think about how many people you could have parking with the 2 bedrooms in the back. Your description in the back, I did notice you addressed parking in a kind of weird way in 10.1112.22, where you say it be rounded up to a whole number. Why don't we just make this clear to people that if you have, instead of doing square feet, if you have 2 bedrooms, you have so many people. You could possibly have so many people. As the good counselor said there, if you're not limiting the bedrooms, how many cars can you actually have? So I would look at other communities on that. It's a lot more simplified for the layperson to do this. Again, at the end, my concern is abutters being notified if things are happening here. Even, it's not clear to me, even with an administrative approval, if I could look out my window tomorrow and see somebody with a dozer in there. I think in all of the neighborhoods here, the neighbors need to know. You're not talking about, just a little thing here. This is the people's biggest asset here. This is a very important thing. And I would be concerned from a realtor perspective as coming in and looking at a property and saying, okay, this is great, I have these views and everything, and then a realtor has no way to know what is going on if it's not notified by anybody, or it doesn't go through the boards, or it's not put out to at least the abutters. And selling a property and then having the person move in and having an ADU with 2 stories. I don't know where you're going to go with that, with 2 stories being put in the backyard. I think notification and abutter notices need to be put on, whether it's an administrative approval or not. And on that note, running through this through planning director, even if it meets all the standards, is kind of unacceptable on the other side because there's no notification. If it runs through the planning board, even as an administrative approval on the agenda, people are going to have an idea of when it's on there, and that's my point. The other point I would make on that, I know in the RSAs establishing planning boards, the planning board members are required to live in the community. Staff is not. So that's a very sore spot for a lot of people, and I'll tell you that up front. So those are my comments in general. Again, please simplify. This is very complex, and it was very hard to follow through all of this. I think a lot of the stuff that you're putting on that, okay, and I'll go back to the colors because that's what I was discussing. A lot of stuff that Nick put on in the blue and everything, some of the stuff with going through doors and windows and everything like that is a lot of overkill. You cover it once in there and then you cover it in the back. That has to be the same as the dwelling. So I urge you to simplify. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Andrew Simonis, 460 Richards Ave. I hope that my letter was taken with respect because I know that these things do not come easy nor overnight. So certainly understand the litany of things that you have to go through and then go through again just to get to this conversation, to this table today. I think in agreement with what Petra just highlighted, we want to continue the spirit of being good neighbors and like good community stakeholders. So the public notice is important in the regard to take streets like Broad, Miller, Richards, those areas that in some ways a lot of these ADUs could be obtained by right or certainly with these proposed changes by administrative approval. So with that said, I do think that some of those lots are smaller and still could propose a little bit of an issue. And I don't think that this, I don't think that the city nor the property owner is going to make friends with their neighbors by just having these things written off and signed off on and then constructed. So I don't know how it is best implemented. Maybe it is administrative approval through the planning board agenda so that it is publicized. But oftentimes, I think it comes back to the focal point of understanding and public understanding. It's not just about the property owner's understanding of how these things are permitted and obtained, but it's also the neighbor's understanding of this is why this property owner was able to do so, and this is how they were able to achieve that, and here are the ways that I could have either spoken for, against, or contributed to the decision-making process of this ADU. So the understanding to me is really important, that we break it down to really that simplistic view in that layman's terms, so that when a notice goes out or when someone does get approval and then the neighbor sees the contractor show up and start building, they say, okay, I can understand why that was given approval, or, well, maybe that doesn't make too much sense to me. I need to go and research more, find out more information. So those thought patterns to me are important because we want to make sure that our residents and our community stakeholders are understanding of why we have these things in place and how they got to where they are. So I think that's a lot of what you'll read in my letter. It's just about collecting that many more perspectives and then coming up with a more comprehensive full circle view. So that's the only thing. And otherwise, I think there are a lot of really good changes. The bedroom count, I'm certainly in favor of, because as previous people have said and suggested, people do put a lot of human beings in smaller rooms, and it will continue to happen unless there is some sort of constraint on it. So that's something that I think could be continued forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have one person online. Liza, if you want to go ahead.
Thank you. Liza Hewitt, 726 Middle Road. I have a couple of comments and a few questions. First comment, I'm glad to see that Corey addressed the bedroom limit. I think there absolutely needs to be a 2-bedroom limit. I think you need to go back and take a look at what the intent, as I've spoken about before in these meetings, what the intent of these ADUs are. In the case of aging parents or a child living with you, you're not going to need more than 2 bedrooms. And I think that what it does is it encourages, as we've said, just the stacking of human beings in little boxes to say that it's unlimited. I'd also worry about whether in the future it could lead to short-term rental situations. So it sounds like you've got that covered. Happy to hear about that. Moving on to building specifications. The volume and footprint, I still think is unclear, but it sounds like Rick Chelman is on it. Thank you, Rick, for bringing up your points, and I know you're going to pursue that to make sure that it is more clear. I like the wording of the, quote, entire structure to be less than principal dwelling, but I still think 75% is big, 2,000 square foot is big. And I would encourage you to go back and really talk some further about that. I don't really like the idea of the ability to put dormers on the DADU. Sorry about that, Nick, because I know that's one of your things. But while it encourages the design, which I understand that perspective, I also think that it encourages volume. And so that's not a big plus in my book. Please, please, please take out the phrase clearly subordinate in 10.8.14.53. You know that's my thing. I've been talking about this in every meeting you've had. It's confusing, and it can lead to misinterpretation. I know that you further clarify it underneath it, but clearly subordinate is not a good phrase, and it's not a good phrase as far as lawyers are concerned either. So then I have a question about why you took out the facade requirements. I heard that briefly sort of stated during this meeting. I'm not talking about the facade jutting out from behind the building. I'm talking about the entire facade of the building that faces the street. That piece was just taken out completely. I think that it helps to further define the size if that is left in, but I also recognize that the requirement would need to be cleaned up. The language is not clear. Also, a question about why the minimum lot area for a DADU was removed. It may have just been, there are a lot of things I don't understand, and I may have just missed that point, but I do question that. Parking, one spot, while I realize that's what's in there now, I think that you need to pay attention to the survey that you did. You took a lot of time to do that survey. You asked a lot of questions of the abutters, and what was clear was that the top concern was parking. So why don't we address that? If you say one spot and everything goes through and it's approved, who exactly is the parking police on a private property? Do you call the police? Do you call Ben Fletcher? Does he come over in his truck and say, no, you've got too many parking spots or too many cars? Let's not be ridiculous. In a perfect world, we'd all be riding our bikes, but it's not perfect. And I think that, if you have 2 bedrooms that are being used by 2 people, they're going to have 2 cars. Whether we like it or not, that's what's going to happen. So you need to make sure that they provide spaces so they're not parking all over the street. They're not parking on top of their neighbors, because I just don't think that's fair. Architecturally consistent requirement. I know Greg just spoke about, just kind of ripped it apart. I was kind of glad that was further defined, just because it's impacting me in an ADU that's being built next door to me that absolutely does not have anything to do with the main structure. It's going to look completely ridiculous, and it was approved by the planning board over a year ago. So I liked some of that personally, but I question who's going to judge this. I still have, this kind of leads into this whole building by right thing, which I don't think was really explained exactly I did pick up more as the meeting went on, kind of what you were talking about, but I'd like to see that really laid out. I'd like somebody to explain to us in the public, this will be potentially approved by right, this will be approved by CUP, so that we are clearly aware of that. And I think that Andrew said that beforehand. It's important that residents understand this. I think that sometimes you sit in your meetings, and I do this for business as well. I sit in a meeting and I say, well, we all understand it, so we're all good. And I think you need to remember that us lay people do not understand what you're talking about. And I think you need to be very, very clear so that there aren't any misinterpretations and people are not upset with you. The building by right, this administrative approval, I assume it says in there that Deb herself will be overseeing this and approving all ADU applications. That's a lot, and I worry about whether or not it's going to be kind of kicked down the hallway to somebody else if Deb gets too busy with her other duties. I think that it needs to have more than one set of eyes on it, on the approval, which it does when it goes through the planning board, which it doesn't when it's an administrative approval and one person's gotten it onto their desk. I think we've hired a consultant here that in the beginning meetings you talked about was going to go around and look at other towns' ordinances and what they do. And the couple that I read through in other towns, I don't think they're approving these by right. I may be wrong, but I'd like you to really look at that. So in closing, I urge you to remember that while property owners have their rights, abutters in neighborhoods have rights too. And I hope that you keep that in mind as this goes forth. Thank you very much for all your work. I look forward to seeing a version that doesn't have lines through everything because it's really hard to understand for next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Liza. And we have one more, Esther Kennedy.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having public comment, Beth, and others. I guess it's always nice being in an environment where you're really not right there and you can listen in, almost like listening on a radio. I heard a lot of I like this, I want this from the city. And I guess I'm a little disappointed in that. I was hoping it would be more contribution from what we want as a community. I am sitting in a situation now where I sit in the ADCC, and I've said for the last couple meetings that I really worry about what Portsmouth wants. And I heard the hype, and that's scary to me, in the backyard, having two stories that aren't currently existing, or a third, two stories added onto a garage with the dormer situation. I also am really concerned with the fact that we are really trying to have these administrative approvals, because the one thing with administrative approvals is you don't have public comment. You don't have public comment about the parking, and how is that going to affect my front parking, especially if there's no parking on the property, or if there's parking in the street. I know there has to be one parking spot, but I agree. If you have 2 bedrooms, you're going to have more than one person. So I guess I would encourage you to have those conversations. Again, I agree with what Liza said. I heard the same thing, that Mr. Tainer was going to go around and kind of look at what other communities have done on EDUs and how they have chosen to take them on, and I would encourage that to happen again. Or if it has happened, we haven't been presented with that information, maybe we can continue to give that information. Again, I'm really worried about what we want our city to be and how we want our city to look. And I haven't heard anyone discuss that in this. How do you want the city to be? What do we want for a look for our city? Right now, I'm sitting on the waterfront running the kayak shack, and I can tell you, this is a picture that people take. So how do we make sure that every neighborhood could be a picture that people take? How can we make sure every neighborhood is an enjoyable place to live? And I'm not sure adding people on small plots of land is the appropriate way. Now, as someone who is considering a dwelling, I do have a barn, and if the zoning changes, maybe I could consider it. I would be totally in favor of things that are already there. I'm all right with the garden cottages, the small accessory unit for when people come to visit you as a family. But I really think that building a two-bedroom, I'm psyched that you went to two-bedroom, got rid of the 3+ bedroom. Building a two-bedroom dwelling is really another house. And how does that look in the neighborhood? Now, if we, as a community, want triple deckers like Boston, want really dense population in our neighborhoods, then we as a community can say that. But right now, I'm only hearing I from the city. Everything I've heard being brought up has been questioned by the city from other members on the board. And I hope that it can become a we at some point soon here. Because I really do believe things like this, and with the price of property in our city right now, could really change the look of our city. So thank you for the time, thank you for the ability to have public comment, and I can't wait to hear the next meetings. Have a good day.
Thank you. And with that, I don't see any other hands. Any other last comments?
Corey sent me a quick note. He had to run. He said that he wanted us to think about it. If we have administrative approvals, could we require confirmation of a butter notification with a certified letter receipt with the way the DES does it for wetlands permit applications? Interesting idea.
If I could just offer clarification that might help some community members. There is no administrative approval that will occur for any new construction. So the only administrative approval that's on the table is for
Existing.
if there's a house and part of the house will be converted, or there's a cottage and that is a completely conforming cottage to setbacks, and then there's no new construction. So I think that, because I did hear that from one, and I just want to reassure the community that there won't be bulldozers coming in, because that is not what is being proposed today. And I know that also that Rick has a summary of some of the changes, so just looking for direction from you, Council Moreau, if you'd like to hear what we heard and how we will respond to that, and then if you still would like to either reschedule another work session or move it forward, that'd be the direction I'm seeking at this time.
Yeah, let's get a summary of the changes that are going to be made, and then we can decide as a group what we want to do moving forward.
How are those changes going to be made, though? I think, I'm not lobbying for another meeting, but maybe a smaller group should meet before the bigger group meets. I know you guys have been doing that, but rather than having you go through it all and then come to a meeting and go, oh, well, you know, what about this? We just didn't think about it. I wonder if we should have the option of having a smaller group.
Or we could have those changes sent out to the group, and we can get feedback back that way.
It's just the stage of getting from here to changes is another deliberative process that I think might benefit from more conversation.
I feel like for most of them, and I think we can go through them, we understand what the intent of the change that you're seeking is. And so where that is not clear, maybe there is additional conversation. But for most of them, I do feel like, please make sure that you change the volume to gross floor area. Please make sure that we allow for additional height only when they have additional setback. I mean, I feel like we've resolved, but there might be one or two that we haven't yet. I think the home occupation one is in my head, that we want to make sure that we keep the standard in place, or if we don't keep the standard in place, that it's because we understand that the protections are there. But we could definitely provide a reasoning for that. But maybe when he goes through the list, we'll have a better sense about where the committee's at and if they feel like they need to kind of come back.
Okay, so what I have in my notes, the first thing is on the use table, adding a new line for existing accessory dwellings that are not being expanded but do not conform to dimensional standards, and those would have a conditional use permit. So we, instead of having 4 categories, we would now have 5 categories of detached accessory dwelling units. I'm just going to go through this first. There's the question about home occupations, and I've heard both sides of it. It's important to note that I think there was a misunderstanding at one point about somebody thinking that the detached accessory dwelling unit could be used as an office for the resident of the primary dwelling unit, and that's clearly not the case. And a home occupation is only for the person living in the dwelling unit, and it's maximum of 300 square feet. So it really is, it's like a desk, a room with a desk. So I guess the question is, right now, we allow one home occupation in the principal or accessory dwelling unit. And the question is, should we allow it in both? Should we allow it in neither? So I guess that's kind of way up in the air right now.
In my mind, I see a home occupation very different from working from home.
A home office, which is a different,
Right, right. And I think we need to be clear about whether or not you're running a business out of something, or you're just someone whose job doesn't require you to go somewhere. You're sitting in your ADU and you can, sit at a computer or on the phone or whatever the case may be. So I think if we could be just super clear, because I don't think any of us have an issue with someone that works from home in an ADU, but I don't think we want someone running a business as a true home occupation out of the ADU. And I think we need to define that
So
properly.
that gets into getting into definitions and redefining home occupation. Because right now, what we have is a home occupation is an office or other use customarily conducted as an accessory use to a dwelling. And there's a maximum floor area of 300 square feet, no outdoor storage, outdoor parking of no more than one vehicle, no deliveries from vehicles with more than 2 axles. So and 300 square feet is, it's tough to do a lot of types of uses. So I think it does include a home office. If I were, basically my extra bedroom is my home office, so it would qualify as a home occupation under this definition. And
I mean, but if I
and
could,
there's a home occupation 1, home occupation 2. Home occupation 1 has no sign, no public visitation, no clients. You're literally just working from a desk in your home.
So is there a purpose of even having that in there?
Well, it's listed
No
as a
sign.
What's that?
If you're not running a business out of your house,
Right.
is it a home occupation? If you're working from home?
Well, that is a home occupation, yes. It's a home occupation if you have no clients coming to you. Just if you're an
It's just a home
engineer, if you're a
office.
planner, if you're an accountant, and you're not having clients come to you.
So the question I'd have in my own mind is, why is that even in zoning?
We have 2 levels. We have
No,
home
but
occupation.
why do we need that
Right.
in zoning?
I think it's an outdated
Yeah.
home occupation
People working
definition.
remotely don't need to be
But
regulated.
there is a home occupation 2.
Well,
which
that
does allow
might be
people
the
to
new
come.
one, and it's the only one.
Well, I think that goes way beyond the discussion of accessory dwelling units. So we're not going to get into, I don't think you want to get into redefining home occupations at this point.
I don't know that we don't, given people working remotely now, and I never realized that home occupation 1 was working home.
It may,
And not running a
be
business.
a definitional issue because it also ties into homeowner restrictions. Some require conformance with zoning, so you want to be sure that
Yeah.
simple.
Worth
Yes.
looking at.
Yeah, it's. I think I agree with Beth what she said. It can happen. So, I think maybe looking at the definition. But for now, I think what we're talking about is home occupation 1 is probably okay in both. I think
If it's working from home,
That's
yeah.
what- yeah, I think that's what we're talking about.
That's right.
So, but it might need refinement.
Yeah, so we can look at that. Okay.
That definition is definitely a definition that doesn't contemplate the current status of what is
Right.
happening.
In the,
In the market.
Okay,
It was awesome, 1929.
let's move on to the
Just
next.
capture that first.
Is allowed in both. Home occupation 2,
Should home occupation 2 be allowed in either, if you're creating a second dwelling unit, does that sort of go beyond? So it's home occupation 2 does allow clients to come, does allow larger vehicles to make deliveries.
Is it
does allow
currently
a
allowed
sign.
is it currently allowed in the single-family home?
Some
Like,
areas, right?
I say wherever it's allowed now, it could stay, but
In the primary
But only
building.
in the primary only. Yeah.
I can't, where's that home occupation?
Whatever the restrictions are today for it, the same in the
It
primary.
should stay, yeah.
Only
Only in the primary.
So
Primary.
that's changing, because what we were saying here is that the the way this was written, the owner could actually live in the accessory dwelling unit, but you're saying that,
The owner's not, yeah, but if the owner lives in the accessory, it's accessory.
Yeah.
The primary is
so
big.
if the owner lives in the accessory dwelling unit, the owner cannot have a home
No,
occupation?
the tenant can.
Okay, so,
Whoever's in the primary,
If the owner lives in the accessory, he can have a home occupation 1.
right, but not a 2.
so in the current use table, home occupation 1 is allowed everywhere where residences are allowed. Home occupation 2 is either allowed by right or by special exception. In the residential districts, is allowed by special exception. So that's what the protection is, that neighbors get notified if you're going to have something where clients are going to be coming and have a
Right.
sign outside.
Yep,
So you're thinking
We
home
want to
occupation?
limit it to the principal structure.
correct.
That's what I'm hearing.
Right.
Okay.
And it does say, so essentially it says, except that the property owner may have a home occupation, but I think we want to
We're
say
gonna change that.
the principal, the occupant of the principal structure may have a home occupation 2. Either one may have a home occupation
allowed,
1.
yes.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
Yes.
Both get
If
one.
already allowed in the
Right.
code.
Yep.
Okay. Okay.
Well, it will be allowed, because the only places where it's not allowed is in the industrial districts right now, so.
Okay.
Okay, so I guess I hear the comment, it didn't come out from this group, but the comment about the term clearly subordinate, we probably don't even need that word clearly subordinate, because we got all these other criteria. There's the question about the height of the building and setback and so forth, changing volume to gross floor area. I guess we're just going to note the question about what about a principal dwelling that isn't in character with the rest of the neighborhood. We're going to note that, and
We're going to work on the design standards, I
okay.
think, for dormers,
Yep.
for that
And whether or not we're
situation.
going to put them just once or twice.
we're
We're gonna do it once.
We're going to consolidate
We're gonna do it once.
consolidate that
Okay.
list.
Any
yeah.
difference will be
Yep.
Yep,
separated.
yep.
I'm going to make the wording consistency for structure versus building. The question about allowing some increase under certain conditions, 814534.
For the 750
Is
square
that what it is,
feet.
534 is
We were
footprint?
going to write some criteria, one or two criteria there where that would allow an increase in the footprint if it met the following standards and up to a certain percentage, and maybe.
Talking about the footprint?
Yeah, the
No, I
one that
didn't
says
think
the
we were gonna-
750, and you said, well, maybe 8 would be
I
okay.
did, but I don't remember talking about adding standards. I just think we need to add a provision that allows for it to happen.
That's what I mean, but I don't like a provision that allows it to happen
Open-ended.
without a criteria that tells us under what circumstances it would be acceptable. So,
I can't think of any other than running it through what we already have, which is architectural design guidelines and
well, then that's the
subordination.
standard. Then
Okay,
that's the standard.
so-
yeah.
We're going to restore the two-bedroom cap? Is that
Yes.
correct? Okay. And Corey had the suggestion about a butter notification for administrative approvals. I don't know whether that's
Yeah, we're going to have to work on
working
how
out. Okay,
that might
yeah,
work.
that's what I have.
I think we need to just make sure we check with the legal department on that.
Okay. Is that good?
Oh, I did have, there was some stuff on 535 that we were going to adjust the language. There's
Which
two.
is- What's
yeah,
535?
10814-535, which says that,
Volume versus, yeah, no, that's the gross floor area.
which was
Yeah.
the one that, that they could go, maybe that's not. right.
3-3.
Yeah.
Of it.
That's going to be increased setback if higher.
Yes, no taller, yeah, right.
That's 3-3.
Yep.
5-3-3.
And then we're going to correct that one.
Yep.
Did you catch,
I
did you?
got that,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, those are the ones.
Okay.
Anything else? Anything else missing? Anyone's notes?
I just wanted to make a couple comments about some of the comments that were made, just hopefully they're helpful. We're obviously looking at the home occupation piece, and we just went through it. I think in respect to parking, what we might want to consider is just, again, a reference to the off-street parking requirements. So it's clear to somebody that's reading the ADU ordinance that they need to go there, just like drainage and lighting, because it may not be intuitive to a layperson that
I thought
what the
we had
parking.
that. That's why-
I took it out because it was
Okay.
already in the back, and I don't think it's intuitive that, to a lot of people, that rounding up to the next whole number means 1.1 equals 2.
We'll just bring it
So I
back.
think we should make it clear what the parking requirement is here and have it be consistent with the back. So
Thank you
we're
for
not
noting that.
wasting oxygen on it,
Yeah.
because it
So,
happens.
because someone had mentioned at a previous meeting that, we can't have half a parking space. Well, because I think they didn't read farther back in that section, there is a minimum one parking space that has to occur under the existing parking regulations. We did sort of bring in that reference to draw attention to it, and that was the point. I didn't realize you had taken it out, but I think we should bring it back, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of municipalities don't have their rounding operate like ours, which is 1.1 equals 2. Normally 1.5 equals 2, or 6, or 7. So I think it'd be good to just clear the air and make that very clear where it is, so we're, again, not, like you
In
say,
no case
wasting.
shall the parking be less than one space, just to make
Yeah.
it very clear.
We're going to work on the dormer piece, because I think, we heard a lot of different views from the speakers outside this group, and dormers are really important to get right, because they don't actually, they do affect the visual building height and the mass and the volume of what you're looking at, but they're not incorporated into measuring how tall a building is. So we either need them in here or we need them out of here. And if people want dormers to just be what they are and it goes through an architectural design guideline, that's one way to approach it. What I was advocating and what was initially drafted here is that we're a little more careful than that. I will say, looking at what I'm sure many people in the community have looked at, which is 5 other communities that were emailed to us from a planning board member, only one of them I saw had a checklist, and the checklist is a good thing to have, but it's not in the ordinance. It's made from the ordinance. So that's what you do when you're done this exercise, not now.
Companion document.
It is,
Right.
Part of
it's
it.
a
It's
how-to.
part of the plan. We just haven't
Right.
gotten far enough along
So
to
I
do
just
it.
want to make that clear. Even
We heard that they want
Rye
a
or
handbook,
whoever.
and it would be in a handbook.
We said that. We said that.
So I did note that Rochester, one of the 5 communities, does allow as-of-right ADUs. I don't actually know how they do it. I haven't dug in deep enough. Most of these ordinances that were sent out are so simplistic. They may be easy to use, but they generate, it's like pulling a slot machine trying to win as to how you'd interpret as a planning board or a permit granting authority, what the outcome would be. They all seem to lift the state statute in respect to consistency with a single-family structure, period. What the hell's that mean? We're trying to address that in Portsmouth and go much deeper. So I think people need to get that. I totally accept what I think Greg said. The ideal would be to have a pattern book, but I haven't seen a pattern book in New Hampshire that would at all work for Portsmouth. A pattern book meaning, hey, here's the design, it's pre-done. If you make your ADU look like this, you can have an administrative approval. That's the gold standard, and I don't think anyone in New Hampshire has that yet. And I could be wrong, but I'd like to see it if someone's got it. It's certainly not in these 5 examples. And we'd like to be there someday, but we're not there right now. I'll speed up here. The accessory building comment about the quality, I think an important comment was made about verbatim matching a copper downspout or a gutter. I think that's not the intention here. It's about consistency, not conformity. So if the word match is leading some folks to be anxious, we should change it. It's about, the HDC does this
I was gonna
every
say.
month. Somebody has a
Compatible,
slate
not
roof, they put a
duplicative.
faux slate roof, they put an asphalt roof. They use their best judgment to substitute materials and maintain consistency with the principal structure. So
We can
that's on
soften,
me.
and I think that we wanted to make sure that that is accessible language. We heard that from, so I think we can refine that a little bit, that section.
But these aren't sheds. That term was used a couple of times by the speaker. These aren't just little garden sheds in the backyard. They're mini houses. They're not tiny houses. They're way bigger than tiny houses. So
Subordinate houses.
yeah. So they need to be done
not
right, and
everyone.
they need to be done differently than driving to Lowe's or Home Depot to buy a shed to put in your backyard. And I think that's why we're digging as deep as we are to try and get our arms around the design guidelines. Rick Chelman brought up the GLA thing, and I think it's tripped some people up as to that's what we're doing. We are not doing gross living area. We are doing gross floor area, which includes even the thickness of the walls. So the volume and footprint standards speak to the gross floor area of the structure, as it does now. So I just wanted to make sure.
Stop saying volume.
Okay. Well, when you take the height and you take the footprint and you take the GFA, you actually get volume.
That's fine, but we're not
Yeah,
regulating.
but we're not, that's
Yeah.
not how you
Well,
used
You're
it, so.
regulating it by those three standards.
Yeah, right.
So we are.
We can fix that.
No, you're not in that paragraph, so move on.
Not in that paragraph. 3 paragraphs added together.
Excellent. Come on. I
okay.
gotta get to work. Do you have a meeting?
I think we should take one more pass at the facade piece that Liza brought up. I don't think we need it, but maybe I'm wrong, and let's talk about it. And, yeah.
So I'm feeling like we probably need to get together as a group again to review this again.
Yes.
Okay, so there you go.
Yeah. I think it would be unwise to not do so.
We have these. All right, if there's nothing else, I'm going to adjourn the meeting.
So move, second.
Have a great holiday weekend, everyone.